Hi, sports fans. I'm Andrew Haubner here with the CU Independent and CU Sportsmag here talking to University of Colorado head coach Tad Boyle. Tad, good to have you with us.
Yeah, good to be with you.
So we're not really going to talk too much on this season. We won't dwell on it, but a couple of pressing questions that I figured were a bit worth asking. This time last spring, Spencer Dinwiddie was gone, and you had a new team. Askia Booker was going to be your senior leader. Looking back on it from a year, is there anything that you would have changed differently knowing what you know now?
Well, I would have been tougher on this group. I think if I made one mistake this year with this team, it was maybe trusting that our players would kind of figure things out on their own in terms of what we needed to do. Because we did have some guys that had been in this program. You mentioned Askia Booker, Josh Scott, Xavier Johnson, guys that had been around, had some success, been in some NCAA tournaments, and I felt like they kind of would be a little bit further along in their development as leaders, and certainly knowing what we needed to do to get things done. So I think sometimes as a coach I took a back seat, kind of waiting for them to take the lead, and if I had to do over again, I wouldn't do that. I'd probably take the lead myself and be a little tougher on a consistent basis and demand more than I demanded out of them this year.
So during media day last year, or this previous year, you talked about sitting down with George, former head coach of the Denver Nuggets, and said that you wanted to implement a more high-paced offense. Were you able to do that in any capacity? And if not, what was the roadblock?
We weren't able to play as fast as I wanted to play. You know, the roadblock, if you look at our team this year, especially offensively, we were a poor passing team. We were 12th in the conference in assists. And by the way, there's only 12 teams in the conference, so we were dead last in that area. We didn't take care of the ball. Our assist-to-turnover ratio was not very good. And so taking care of the basketball, passing the basketball, making plays for each other was not a strength of ours. So I would still like to play faster, but we got to learn how to take care of the ball. We have to work on our skill level in terms of passing and decision making, whether it's in the open court or even in the half court, to get to that point.
And speaking of guards, of course, Askia Booker did make headlines when he opted to skip out of the CBI, and a lot of people kind of see this as somewhat of a taint on otherwise really incredible legacy. He's in the top 10 at CU in at least 10 statistical categories here, record-wise. And as a coach and having had him for all 4 years, what is your view of Askia Booker? What do you think his legacy will be once all is said and done here?
Well, again, Askia you just mentioned, he had a good career here. I mean, he finished in the top 10. He was an impact player from the day he stepped on campus. You know, one could argue that Askia's most effective year was his freshman year when he was coming off the bench. He was that sixth man, kind of came in and gave us a spark, which is what Askia does. And you know, the senior year, and I don't think anybody would argue, was disappointing for not only Askia but for certainly our team. But he was a part of 3 NCAA tournaments and really was part of the resurgence of Colorado basketball. And so Askia's got a lot of things to be proud of. And I think as you look back on his career, you got to look at it in totality. You can't just look at his senior year or look at the last part of his senior year and let that taint your view on Askia, because he brought a lot of good things to this program.
Now, when you look towards next year, when you think about the teams that you've coached, there's always been an elite guard always up front. It's Alec Burks, Spencer Dinwiddie, Askia Booker for this year. Do you think that there's anyone on this roster that can step into this role, maybe a more experienced Dom Collier or the one that everybody's talking about, Josh Fortune?
Well, certainly, I think Dominique, after his freshman year, learned a lot, and this offseason is going to be a critical offseason for him in the weight room as well as hopefully the film room, where he learns and understands the mistakes that he did make and what he can do better on the court. Because the one thing about Dominique Collier, he's got great instincts for the game. He's got a good feel for the game. He's a playmaker, and he just has to be able to finish those plays. And whether it's plays for himself at the rim or plays for his teammates completing passes, there's room for improvement. But I think he's got a chance to be an elite level guard. Josh Fortune, you mentioned, redshirted, and George King redshirted as well for different reasons. Josh, obviously, the transfer rule. George, for a year of development in his body, and so I think both those guys are going to bring an added element to next year's team that weren't on this year's team. One of them is the ability to consistently make outside shots, hopefully, because that's something we have to get better at as well, is making shots from the perimeter to free it up for guys like Josh Scott, Wesley Gordon down low.
And speaking of Josh Scott, people have always considered him to be one of the leaders of this team, but it seemed as though this year that the leadership on and off the court, there was something lacking. There were guys showing up late consistently to shoot-arounds and guys sitting for halves. Did you get the feeling that a leader needs to step up on this team, or do you feel like there are guys like Josh Scott and X Johnson who just need to have another summer before they can be in that leadership role?
This year's team, without a doubt, was void of leadership. And you mentioned, the being late. You mentioned, not being vocal enough and letting your teammates know that, hey, that's not acceptable. And that didn't happen. Now, Josh Scott, there's no doubt about it, in terms of how he operates his life as a student, as an athlete, as a member of this campus community, there's no better role model than Josh Scott. Now, the step that he has to make, or anybody on our team that's going to be a leader next year, and I think Josh is the most logical candidate, but he has to become more vocal with his teammates and kind of lay the law down, so to speak, like, hey, this is what we do, this is how we do it, and make his voice heard in the locker room. That doesn't come naturally to Josh. Josh is a guy that kind of takes care of his own business and does a very good job with that. But that's not leadership. That's being a model student athlete, and to be a leader, you got to step out on the risk scale a little bit and not be afraid to put a teammate in place when that needs to be happening, or encourage them, when they need to be encouraged. And I think Josh Scott will be the leader of next year's team, and hopefully there'll be some other guys that step up in that role to help him with that, because it is a lot to be on one guy, but hopefully that'll happen.
So you mentioned a group of guys that need to step up. Is there anyone in particular that you feel, not that you want them to step up, but that they need to step up for this team to be successful?
Xavier Johnson, no question. He needs to step up. He needs to become more consistent. And again, you have to lead yourself before you can lead others. And that's why I mentioned Josh Scott, because Josh Scott does a great job of leading himself. Xavier Johnson has shown at times this year he can, but the consistency's not there. So, it could be anybody. It doesn't have to be a senior. It could be a sophomore. It could be a junior. It could be a freshman. And so we'll get a better feel for that as this off-season kind of progresses, and you see what guys do on a consistent day-to-day basis. We will. But leadership is something that we're going to talk about and address, and hopefully continue to develop, as we move towards next year.
And personnel-wise, you are going to be losing one guy from this year, Dustin Thomas, who has opted to transfer out. Right in the immediate aftermath, it was described as a mutual kind of decision. He was someone who wasn't happy with where he was playing and playing time. Do you feel as though that there are other players on this team that might feel similar to him, or is it just Dustin wanting to be a more perimeter player?
Well, I think every year you're going to have some sort of attrition, whether it's by graduation, whether it's by guys leaving early to go to the NBA, or certainly guys that decide that they want to find another program and transfer to. And if you look at Division I basketball today, Division I basketball, last year there were in excess of 600 transfers. There's only 350 Division I basketball teams. So transferring is a part of our culture now. It's a part of Division I basketball, and when you run the numbers, we have 13 scholarships. I can have 5 guys on the floor at once. Usually you got 8 or 9 in your rotation. That means you're going to have 3 or 4 guys that aren't playing. And sometimes those 3 or 4 guys would like to play, and they choose to transfer and play elsewhere. And some guys may not like the role that they have on the team. So every year this time of year in the spring after the season is a time where I sit down with every player and talk about what is best for them in terms of their future. And with Dustin, he felt like it was in his best interest to leave, And I love what he brought to our team when he was here, and I do nothing but support him.
So when you do talk about recruiting, assistant coach Tom Abadamarco left here in 2013 to take a coaching job over at Loyola Marymount. He was the guy who found and recruited guys like Andre Robertson and Spencer Dinwiddie. Do you feel that recruiting has taken a hit, or development has taken a hit since Coach Abadamarco has left this program?
No, because again, the way our staff recruits is we don't have hired guns. Okay, we recruit as a staff, and we do a lot of what I call cross-section recruiting. So, for example, when Coach Abadamarco was here, if he saw a player that he liked, he would send Coach Prelo to see him. And if Coach Prelo liked him, he would send Coach Roan to see him. And eventually I would see him. So all 4 coaches would have buy-in with that player or those players. Or there may be 2 coaches that have buy-in and 2 coaches that say, we don't think this kid's good enough.
So the Champions Center out by Folsom Field just laid down its final beam, and it's getting ready to be built. Football, AD Rick George has said, football is kind of the project they want to undertake of making football a big powerhouse again. As basketball coach, do you feel that there's a bit of pressure because the team has been so good these past 4 years that, losing, having another tough season combined with football having a good one could see support sort of waver? Do you feel any pressure that next year has to be a good year for you guys to keep up the momentum?
Pressure self-induced, and we've got a great athletic director, Rick George, and what he's done since he's been here in terms of the Champions Center and getting that ground broken and the funding and all the donors that he has cultivated to get that done is really remarkable when you think about it. And listen, nobody wants to have great college football on this campus more than I do. Number one, I'm a fan. I love college football. I love college Saturdays. Recruiting days for us in the fall at Folsom Field is where we bring kids and their families in, and we show them around, and you see the festive atmosphere. So for the University of Colorado to get where we want to get as a department, and certainly as a university with the landscape of Division I athletics, football is very, very important, and I know that. Obviously, Rick George knows that. Again, I consider Mike McIntyre a friend and a guy that I think is doing a heck of a job rebuilding. And it's not an easy job, but we've all got pressure. Let me tell you that. When it comes to pressure, nobody puts more pressure on themselves, I think, than coaches do. And we've got tremendous support from our administration here, which is you have to have if you